name is Erin Uritis, and I'm the Director of Communications for International Schools Services, or as you may have heard, or we'll often hear ourselves refer to ISS. So there's never been a better time to be in international education. This webinar is the first in the series presented by ISS as part of our commitment to helping connect the world's best teachers and international schools around the world. Throughout the year, we will be offering webinars on a variety of topics and targeting teachers curious about or new to international education, as well as those with more experience. My colleague Christina will be speaking more about the webinar series later, and you can always find more information on our website at www.iss.edu, especially in the Career Services section when you simply click on Find an International Education Job. So we're recording today's webinar, so if you have colleagues or friends that weren't able to make it, please feel free to pass on that link to them once we post it. So let's get started. We're glad that you're here and to learn from and engage with some real veterans in this field. First, I'm pleased to introduce ISS Executive Vice President, Bruce McWilliams, who is Canadian and who has had a long and successful overseas career, first beginning as a teacher in Moscow and then moving up into several school administration positions before becoming head of a wonderful school called Rifaviews International in Bahrain. Bruce also oversees all of our school startup and school management services for ISS. So welcome, Bruce. Next, I want to introduce Keith Cincotta, who's the Director of School Services and a Senior Leadership Executive for ISS. Before joining the leadership team here, Keith was a secondary school counselor and college advisor for 15 years in a variety of locations, and then moved up into administration as a high school principal. He's also raised children overseas, so he has a unique perspective on that. And last but absolutely not least is our panelist Laura Light, who runs the global recruitment business for ISS, and she oversees a wonderful team of several people who have already been or maybe working with some of you online today about getting into this field. So Laura she also has decades-long experience in many countries as an international educator, and so she's an expert not only on this exciting career choice and lifestyle, but she can also speak with authority and detail on the actual process to make that happen for you with her team. So additionally, I just want to welcome one of Laura's team members, Christina Eberhardt, who helped set this webinar up today with our colleague Tawan, and is a key member of Laura's team working with educators who sign up and come on with ISS. So Christina will be jumping in at the end to manage the Q&A section and to wrap it up. And you'll also be hearing from her and maybe some of the other members of the global recruitment team with some follow-up communications. So we'll get started here in just a minute, but one more bit of housekeeping before we begin is that we really encourage anyone online listening to ask questions. We want this to be interactive and for you to engage with our panelists, and they really want to speak to you. So they're going to go through their part of the presentation. Just make sure you're welcome to ask questions at any time. Christina is going to be monitoring those with the team, but just make sure that you hit the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen and not put your questions in the chat feature. That chat feature will be enabled, but we won't be monitoring that for questions. So just put your question in the Q&A, and then we will, in the second half of the discussion, Christina will be kind of directing those to the specific panelists. So that's it for me. Again, we're delighted you're here, really excited to start this. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Bruce McWilliams.
Well, welcome everybody. My name is Bruce McWilliams. As Erin mentioned, I'm the Executive Vice President at ISS. And I've been involved in international education for a long time. I first went overseas in 1986, and my career, I started out in Moscow. At that time, it was the Soviet Union. I worked there for 3 years. Then I moved to Dubai, and I was in Dubai for a long time, about 18 years. Then I helped start up the Coast School in Saudi Arabia. And then from there, I was also in Bahrain for 3 years. And then from there, in 2007, I moved to the ISS home office in Princeton. Just to start off and tell you a little bit about ISS, we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. And we really were one of the early leaders in international education. We were formed in 1955, and we've kind of followed the whole history of the development of international schools. We currently manage 16 schools, and over the course of our history, we've probably established well over 100 on 6 different continents. And we have other divisions in our company. We do school startup and management, as I mentioned. We do executive head search for schools. We also we provide educational supplies for hundreds of schools around the world. We have a foundation division that can do payroll and the financial end for schools. And of course, for you, most importantly, we are involved in teacher recruitment and have been doing that for many, many years. And one thing that Erin said that stuck with me at the beginning, she used the phrase, "It's never been a better time to go overseas than right now." And I thought I would start today by kind of giving you a little thumbnail sketch of the history of international schools. If you go back 30 years ago, there were several hundred international schools, but it was still a very small number of schools relative to today. And the schools were really, really different at that time. Most of the students in the schools were from expatriate families, usually businessmen, foreign US or Canadian or English-speaking businessmen that had been sent to another post, or diplomatic children. And this international school movement was the first developed to meet their needs. And it's changed dramatically. If you go back 10 years ago, the number from a few hundred had risen to 2,700 schools. So that's a huge, dramatic increase in a short period of time. And accompanying that shift, the schools became less populated by expatriate kids and more populated by national students from the country in which the school existed. Today, again, the growth has been dramatic. There are currently about 8,500 schools, and 80% of the population of those schools are now national students. So one thing that we definitely see as a trend in schools, not only is the market exploding, which is why it's such a great time for you to be considering going overseas, but the population of schools has really shifted from expatriate to national. That's not to say that international schools still don't service expatriate kids, because we have lots of expatriate kids in our schools. But really a dramatic increase. Since 2000, we've had a 70% increase in overseas schools, an accompanying 79% increase in overseas faculty. So there's lots of opportunities out there. This is an amazing statistic for me, but currently there are 4.8 million kids in international schools all around the world. And those are staffed by 450,000 teachers. One of the things that we do find when we look at the world, that the growth around the world isn't even. The areas experiencing the most growth right now are China and the Middle East. And one thing that just surprises me, as I mentioned to you, I worked in Dubai for many years. And I think when I worked in Dubai, there were 4 schools, four international schools in Dubai. Currently, there are over 500 international schools in the United Arab Emirates, which is this tiny, tiny little country. It's the most concentrated growth of international schools in the world. So what drove all of this? One of the things that I think really is happening, that's a demographic shift around the world, is you see this emergence of a middle class in China, South Asia, and the Middle East. And these parents want their children to be able to attend Western universities, good quality Western universities. And they see the pathway to those universities as their children receiving a good quality international school education that's presenting research-based best practice and top pedagogy and methodology in the classroom, that's going to allow those kids to be successful and seamlessly fit into an American university. So from a teacher's perspective, I think that, like any market, it kind of ebbs and flows. Right now, I think that this is really a teacher market. For teachers going out to recruit this year, I'm absolutely confident that there will be more jobs out there than teachers to fill them. So I think if you have a good solid resume in your background, you should have no trouble at all getting a job overseas. And ISS, as you'll find out today, we'll get more into that later in the session. But we have all of the tools that you need to be successful in your search. And with that in mind, I will turn you over to Laura Light, our Director of Ed Staffing, and she'll talk to you a little bit about some of the benefits of working in overseas schools.
Actually, I think he's going to turn it over to me, Keith Cincotta, the Director of School Services here at ISS. Laura's going to go after me because we got to follow the slideshow, and the slideshow says opportunity to grow, and that's my area. Aaron introduced me earlier. My name is Keith Cincotta. I've worked here at ISS for 7 years now, and before that I worked in international schools for about 15 years. I worked in Islamabad, Pakistan. That was my first overseas gig. And then I worked in Dubai, also at the American School of Dubai for a long time. As Aaron said, I was a school counselor, and then later I became a high school principal. When I moved back here to ISS, I took over the school supply department and did this job we call senior leadership executive, which means we kind of look after our managed schools. We work with the school heads to help them deliver a good program. I'm glad I get to talk about opportunity to grow, because for me, working overseas has really been transformative for me. I was 24, 25 years old and working in public schools in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and wanted to do and see more. And I did the exact right thing by going to work in international schools. A lot of people have this story, but when I first got the job in Islamabad, Pakistan, I didn't really know where Pakistan was. I had to go, it was pre-internet pretty much. I had to go to a bookstore and get a travel book about Pakistan to see what it was like. And then I moved there and it felt like the whole world opened up to me. You can think of the growth you're going to experience, or international educators experience, both in terms of professional and personal growth. And on the personal side, I go back to that first year in Islamabad, and it was in the first 3 months of my time in Islamabad, I traveled to India with a volleyball team for an international volleyball tournament. And during that trip, one of my kids was detained by Indian police for being Pakistani. And I had to get him sprung out of jail detention. So those are the kind of personal growth situations you sometimes get. I also got to go to a conference in Bangladesh and experience something completely different. And another conference in Cairo. So the opportunity for travel is one of those personal growth areas. Also being thrown into a situation that isn't entirely familiar to you and having to figure it out. For a couple first weeks in Islamabad, I remember getting a giant pile of applications and I had to figure them out. And they were from school systems from all over the world. I hadn't gotten any experience with that when I was living in Allentown, Pennsylvania. So I got to figure that kind of stuff out. On the professional side, also, you work with a bunch of different curriculums. You have to figure out different systems. The IB is very popular overseas. There are a lot of schools that have very high academic demands and really high achieving kids. You're going to work with colleagues most of whom will be career international school teachers. And those are folks who've been to schools all over the world. And they've gained experience there and worked with some great people. You get to go to conferences and bump into people. Some of the world's leading educators love to go to our conferences because they want to travel the world. Typically international school teachers are mobile. They stay on average 3 or 4 years in each place, and then they go on to another place. So it's a way of staying fresh. One of the other things I remembered back from Allentown was the faculty room with the guys who'd been there for 20 years and were just looking towards retirement, and that was not very inspiring. Moving abroad, I did not find that situation at all. There are growth paths internationally. You can think of most of our schools as the same as sort of independent schools here in the US. We've got the whole array of classroom and non-classroom positions. As I said, I was a counselor, and I did middle school counseling, high school counseling, academic advising, college advising. Later, I became a principal. And the nice thing there at the American School of Dubai was I got the opportunity to become a principal when I was in the middle of my master's degree in leadership. But the position came open, and they offered it to me as a chance to get my feet wet with admin. So there's plenty of opportunity for you to grow professionally. You're working with kids and staff from all over the world. Typically, schools will have a lot of host nation teachers that you're going to relate to and see and learn different things. And the kids in our schools, as Bruce alluded to, are from all over the world. It's really a great opportunity to learn about cultures, grow, learn languages, and travel, see the world, work in high-end schools with high expectations that are well-resourced. Really, it was an outstanding experience for me personally to do those 15 years, and I really love being in the international education world. Another area of growth that I had experience with is 2 of my kids were born while we were abroad, one in Pakistan and one in Dubai. We always tease the boy who was born in Dubai that he's eligible for the UAE national team in soccer when the time comes, but I'm not sure they're going to let him do it. But them having the opportunity to grow up overseas has been just a real positive for them. They got an early exposure to all kinds of cultures, all kinds of people. Learn that there's no one way of being that is the right way, given that global perspective that everybody talks about, but what does it really mean? So having grown up in that environment where their friends were from around the world, their teachers were from around the world, and they got to travel to many, many places. Kids grow in some very predictable ways. They're generally much more mature. They're really good with adults. We say they have a comfort for ambiguity, which means that, sometimes you walk into a situation and it's a little bit confusing, and they're used to that and they can deal with it. Also, my kids, having lived in Dubai for so long, didn't wear socks or lace up shoes until they moved to the United States 5 years ago. So that was a little bit of a challenge. But in general, I think they would tell you, as well as we would, that the opportunity they had to grow going to schools overseas is just outstanding. Teaching abroad, growth, professional and personal, there's really no better opportunity out there. So I believe the next person that we're going to hear from is actually going to be Laura Light, who's going to talk about some of the adventure. And Laura is one to talk about the adventure. Laura, how many different countries have you lived in during your career?
Honestly, I can't remember off the top of my head, but thank you for the introduction, Keith. They're going to hear.
17 countries.
No, not that many. But anyways, this is Laura Light, and I'm privileged to be here with ISS. I've actually been with ISS for 10 years now. So, and it's an honor for me to be here and be with these people working in this field. And it's a great world to be part of. As Keith mentioned, and as people mentioned, I have been overseas quite a bit. I started my career at the American School of Kuwait for 2 years in Kuwait, 3 years in the Dominican Republic, 2 years in El Salvador, 7 years in Singapore, 1 year in London, and then 4 years at the UN School in Manhattan. So I've bounced around as an educator before coming to ISS. So, and it's such a privilege for me to be here because in actuality, I was an ISS candidate. I went to the conferences. I went looking for a job through ISS, and it's an honor to be with them right now. So, and I get to talk to you guys about the adventure of living overseas. And yes, I've had the adventures. I've been privileged to be in many different places. The one thing I am going to start by, talking about working overseas and living overseas. You're in a new country, and it does take the right type of person to jump overseas and take this new adventure on. So you've got to be of the right mindset going this one, because you are going to be far away from your family, but oh my gosh, the opportunities that are going to be there for you are incredible. I've lived in many countries, had many experiences. You get immersed in all of the cultures. You are working at these schools. They're American international schools. A lot of them, you're working with a curriculum, and I'll get into teaching an international school next. but you're working in these schools, and so your day-to-day life is going to a school and you're teaching in English. Many people ask us, do I need to know the foreign language of where they're going to be? And no, you're teaching in English. You're using the curriculum that's very similar to here, not identical, but similar. But the aspect of being immersed in a new country is a lot of fun, because with that, you get the opportunity of learning the new languages. I didn't speak a word of Spanish until I moved to the Dominican Republic and then El Salvador, and I learned, you had to learn it on the streets. So now I speak Spanish, and so you get immersed in the languages and the food. The highlight of it all, though, of course, is always the travel. You get to have these great experiences. I'm living in El Salvador, and I'd run to Guatemala for the weekend, or I'd run to Belize. And I don't want to glamorize it too much. There is a lot of glamour in it. There's a lot of fun. But you do get to do a lot of traveling in the parts of the world. But again, you are far away from your family. So you've got to keep that in mind. And along the lines of with the travel, as Keith already mentioned, the schools are all related with each other. They have conferences together, they have sporting events together. And so not only is the adventure and travel outside of work, it's also part of work. And my first conference, Keith mentioned my first conference from the American School of Kuwait is I went to New Delhi for a conference up there. So you just have an incredible experience with all of these. The one good thing about it too is you get immersed in the language, in the cultures, and you get to try new foods. You have to go, it's an adventure on a day-to-day basis, trying to find where a new restaurant is, or when you first get settled, how to go shopping. But it just continues on. You get new food, new experiences. And I came away from all of those adventures with lifelong friends. To this day, I am still friends with many of the people that I met in all of the places I have lived. So they're great places. You're in these schools with like-minded individuals, and that's where I'm going to kind of move on to sort of teaching in international schools, because when you are teaching in international schools, you are, again, on the weekends and running away, but you have the benefits of that as well. And with that comes the aspect of the one thing about these schools is that my saying on them is work hard, play hard. And they have high expectations of the teachers and of the children that are in the schools. But you have much smaller class sizes, and you have these great teams that you work with. In all of the schools I was working with, I would be working on teams with people from Australia who would be in the classroom next door, or from Ireland, or from the UK. So while it's all an adventure, it's also a huge learning curve, because I got exposed to curriculums and teaching styles and different things, because I'm working with these other true professionals on all of these teams. But within the schools all have smaller class sizes, and there's a lot of flexibility. The No Child Left Behind, or the rules and regulations that you run in here, are not apropos for the schools that we work with. But saying that, the parents and the administrations in all of these schools have really high expectations. So you're teaching predominantly above grade level, and you're always asked to do more. So while there's a lot of flexibility, you also have to realize there's also a lot of responsibility that goes along with it. But you have the innovation, you have the ability to be an innovator, you have the ability to create units. The administration wants the teachers to be successful, and they do everything they can to support teachers. And so you're given supplies, you're given opportunity, and you're given real creative ideas or ability to move forward. But you also are being asked to make sure that there's a lot of learning going on. The schools have high expectations. Now, the supplies and what you get also when you're working within these schools, that depends to where you are. Some of the schools are really highly, they have spent a lot of money on the supplies. Some of the schools I went into, I had to make a lot of what I needed within a classroom. But I think as years have gone on, technology is a huge push in all of these schools. So it's important that you are knowledgeable and on top of what's being done within the pedagogy and what's going on with the schools, and then you bring it with you and display that, but you are also ready to learn from those that you are there with. So they're all great opportunities. They're a lot of fun to be with, be places on the weekends and on the workday. And so with that, I think I've kind of covered the international school experience. I am now going to pass it back over to Bruce, I believe, to go from there.
Okay, thanks, Laura. As I mentioned at the beginning of the session, ISS also has schools that we manage. We actually own 2 or 3 schools, but we manage about another 14 schools all around the world. And I think there's some real advantages as you get out there and you're looking at schools. You will have many different opportunities to choose from. I think there's some real advantages to working at an ISS school. One of the main advantages is the experience that ISS brings to the schools. We have, as I mentioned before, been involved in developing and managing schools since 1955. And most of our senior people are experienced prior heads of schools with many, many years of experience. We have risk assessment people, we have curriculum people, and just pretty much any expertise that a school needs, we can provide that school. So one of the things that I think is really beneficial for people, especially if they're first starting out, is I think if you find yourself working at an ISS school, you know that you're going to be working at a school that's based on good values. There'll be strong methodology and pedagogy in the school. There'll be professional development opportunities provided for you. And I just think there's a certain sense of security, particularly for people on their first journey outside the United States or Canada or wherever, to start out in an ISS managed school. So I would strongly encourage you, as you're doing your job searches, to give the ISS schools a look. You can find them on our website, and they really vary. I mean, we have schools out in the middle of the jungle providing an education for oil exec children, right down to schools in the middle of Doha. Just a variety of different sizes. We have a school in Cayman Islands, which is obviously a beautiful school. We've got lots of schools in China. So there's lots of different flavors of ISS schools to pique your interest. So I would encourage you to give them a try. I also wanted to talk today a little bit about the nitty-gritty of the benefits, salary and benefits that go along with an international education. And often from people starting out, there can really be some misconceptions on how to think about this. So one thing I would say to you is, if you're in the United States and you've been working in public schools or the independent schools, it's really pretty simple to determine the relative merits in terms of salary and benefits between 2 schools. It's by and large, you look at the salaries. When you're going overseas, there are many other benefits that come with an international overseas position. So one of the ways that I often will talk to new people about thinking about this is think about what you will be able to bank at the end of the month. Because in the United States, you're pretty much paying most of your expenses. Depending on where you go overseas, many of those same expenses will be picked up by the school and you will not have to pay for them. So you can find yourself very often in an international school making less salary, but actually being able to bank more money at the end of the month. And so I'll just go through some of the things that schools offer. And I will also say to you that there is wide differentiation between the schools in terms of their philosophies, in terms of the governance structures, But where I'm going with this now is in terms of their salary and benefits packages. One size does not fit all. And you can really, as you get out there and start examining these schools on our database, you will really see a huge difference in the offering of schools. So everything that I say now, I will caveat that it's for most schools. That won't apply to all. One thing that I think is a real benefit for international teachers is that in an awful lot of the schools, housing is free. Lots of schools provide the housing for you, which is really nice. If you get picked up at the airport and you will get driven right to your nice, beautiful apartment, or in some case it's a villa or a townhome. Really depends on the school, but typically a school will typically provide a furnished accommodation. Some schools, instead of doing that, what they will do is they will provide you an allowance to go out and rent your own place. The beauty of that is you get to pick your own place. And one thing I would suggest to people is make sure that if that's the case for you, get on the internet and check out how much your allowance will buy on the local market, because there's a tremendous variation in rental costs in the different countries around the world. But anyway, one advantage is most schools, you will get a huge break on housing and your utilities. The schools will typically provide that. One area of the world that does less of that, I would say, is Europe. There are a few European schools that provide housing, but most of them do not. And I think that's just historic, and also I think it's the fact that a lot of people just really want to be in Europe, so the schools don't feel they need to provide that benefit. But once you get outside of Europe, most schools you'll get housing benefit. Another thing that's great is tax-free living. In a lot of countries, you will not have to pay any local taxes. You know, I can speak for myself. I went overseas in 1986, and I came back to the United States, moved to the United States. I'm Canadian, but when I moved to the United States in 2007, in that entire period, I never paid a penny of tax, and I never paid a penny of rent and a penny of utilities. So I was able to bank all of that money. So again, every country is a little different, but there's lots and lots of places where you can go and have a complete tax-free lifestyle. One thing that Americans do need to think about is Americans still need to file a tax return to the United States government, and they are eligible for an earned income exclusion, which in 2017 is 102,000 US dollars. I would encourage all of you, before you go overseas, to make sure you consult an overseas tax expert prior to your move to your new location, because all of the countries are a little different. Canada, you don't need to file taxes, and you can make as much money as you want and you won't be taxed. United States, the foreign income exclusion protects you from tax up to $102,000. You're subject to US tax after that. Another great benefit from being overseas is airfare. Most schools will fly you and your dependents home every year. Typically, it's economy class. Some schools provide you the tickets. Other schools will provide you an allowance to pay for your airfare, and you can choose to spend that how you wish. It really depends on the school. This was a fantastic thing for my wife and I. Our first school was Moscow, and our second school was Dubai. And we would always arrange our flight through Europe on the way home. And we were always able to stop in Europe and get a 2-week holiday before we went back home. It was just a fantastic benefit, and we really got to see the world. So that's a great thing, is that airfare that you get every year. Most schools are going to provide you medical and dental. Every school will have a different plan, and just like it is here in the States, when you change companies, it's worth taking a look at what the particulars of that plan are. One particular thing I would say to people living in the United States is make sure to check whether the medical plan covers you in the United States, because there are plans out there that provide coverage globally but they exclude the United States because of the high cost of medical care there. So just make sure that you know which type of medical insurance your school provides. And then if you want to get that US coverage on your own, you can do that. Most schools provide a retirement benefit, and some of them you pay into a plan. Like I paid into CREF for many, many years when I was in Dubai. Others schools will just give you an equivalent allowance that you will get as a one-time lump sum payment at the end of each school year. And I'm going to sound like your dad now for those of you that are younger than me, but I will tell you, make sure that you put that in an investment fund, because if you do that, when you get to be my age, you can retire comfortably. I've seen young teachers spend that money, and I would encourage you not to. Another thing that's fantastic for people with children is a tuition benefit. Most schools will provide free tuition for your children. Some will limit that to 2 children, others it's more open. And you know, you heard Laura talk about what fantastic schools these overseas schools are. Now, some of these schools have tuitions of $25,000 per student. So you think about it, if you have 2 students attending that school, that's a $50,000 benefit in and of itself. And as Keith mentioned, there's a lot of joy of being in the same school as your kids and watching them through their school years. So that's something that I would think about with you. One final thing before I turn you over is take a look at what currency your salary is paid in. Some schools are going to pay you in US dollars, and other schools, and I think that's more the norm, and other schools will pay you in the local currency. One isn't necessarily better than the other. You just want to understand the nature of that. And if you are being paid in a local currency, understand that if you're paying expenses in the United States, you can be subject to currency fluctuation. And that's just something to think about when you're making that decision. So in summary, I would just say that I think the benefits of an overseas career can really, not only can you experience all of the adventure that Laura talked about and working at a high quality school that you might not get an opportunity to otherwise. In addition to that, it can be really financially rewarding if you pick the right schools. So it's been a wonderful career for me, and all of the people that I know that have made it their career have been very, very comfortable financially. And with that, I think I will wrap it up and turn it over to Christina. And I'm going to get the name right this time. I will turn it over to Christina for the question and answer.
Thank you so much, Bruce. And hi, everyone. My name is Christina, and I'm a part of our global recruitment team here at ISS. I've been seeing many of your great questions come in. Thank you so much for submitting them. So without any further ado, let's get to our first question. I've been seeing a couple of people have been asking about professional development. So Bruce, I'm actually going to gear this one towards you. And how much PD, or professional development, do teachers receive during the school year? And would you mind also talking about the IB curriculum?
Sure. My experience has been that you get phenomenal professional development in international schools. The schools that I've worked in regularly fly in the top people in the field to the school to provide in-service for teachers. They've also had benefits for teachers to attend regional conferences. So there's a regional conference that's focused for people in the Middle East. There's one in the Far East. There's in Africa, in Eastern Europe, in Europe. There are conferences that all of the schools send their people to. So you will have opportunities to attend those conferences. And I also think that there's a really robust professional culture in the schools. So there's a lot of collegial work done in the schools to craft the learning program for students. I would say that international schools no longer is the place where your classroom is your kingdom. I think that people are forming PLCs and collaborating and developing curriculum and developing professional development opportunities within the school and contributing to that within the school. So it's a very, very rich professional environment. And all of the schools will have ongoing school improvement efforts that you will be engaged in. One of the things that I loved about my life in international schools, my experience prior to this was from Canada. We had provincial ministries that dictated everything, what report card you were going to use, what textbook you were going to use. Everything was dictated through the ministries. In these schools, you will be members of the committees that will be making those decisions. So it's a really rich professional experience. And some schools even provide funding for you taking master's degree courses in the summer. Again, every school is a little different, but one thing I think they do have in common is very rich professional development for their people. Schools are smart, and they know that that's one thing that teachers really want, and so they commit a percentage of their budget to provide professional development in their faculty.
All right, thank you so much.
You wanted me to talk about the IB, right?
Yes, if you can.
Okay, so IB is a very popular curriculum internationally. It starts from the elementary grades of the PYP, moves into the MYP, which is the middle school, and then to the diploma program, which is in the 11th and 12th grade. When it gets to the 11th and 12th grade, it's a highly rigorous program. It's a very constructivist, developmental program in the younger grades. I think it's really it's a wonderful program. There are a lot of schools out there. They will hire teachers who do not have IB training. However, they will prefer teachers who have IB training. One of the things that's nice is to be, if you can get yourself into an IB school, they will typically provide the training for you. So I think it's an asset to have IB training if you're going to do a career overseas. It's not a requirement. You can do your whole career without it. But I do think it's one of those things that makes you a little bit more hireable, because there are many schools out there that are doing the IB. Again, schools that have a robust IB program will also have training programs for their people in the IB.
And if it's okay, if I could jump in here really quick, I'll talk a little bit about the IB as well. Many candidates come on asking that same question about getting IB training. And we always say that go look at ibo.org to find out about training. Come into the job search with maybe something in your back pocket saying, I've done some training, I've got some understanding. Bruce is completely right. Schools will hire you if you don't have the IB training, as long as you have the right the attitude, like I want to learn. But having done some of that ahead of time and gone and learned about it as you're going into this process will really be beneficial.
All right, thank you so much. So we have a couple more questions I see regarding dependents. So how appealing is a candidate that brings dependents, and how do you explain your family situation at the application/resume stage? Also, what is the process of relocating families overseas?
Laura, do you want to take that, and then I'll pick up after you?
Sure, I'm on it. That's a very good question about dependents and which way to go. It's one that we get frequently. The schools, it's a financial commitment for them to bring you over. And so normally, and there are outliers on all of this, but normally it's sort of one contract, one dependent. So if you're a teaching couple, they really like teaching couples, and then with children and going in that direction, it's expensive for the schools to bring over families with many dependents. But saying that, there are schools that will do that. So I don't want to discourage people, but it is something that you have to present to the school. And I'm going to go, I think the question was, how do you present this? It needs to be upfront from the very beginning, who you are, what you do, and what you're bringing with you, i.e. your work background as well as your family. Because some schools will be able to accommodate this and be able to work with you, and some schools will not. So it's just being upfront and honest about it at the very beginning. Bruce, do you have anything else about the dependent aspect?
Yes, I think that you can definitely do a career with dependents. Again, it does limit some schools. I did my whole career. My wife is not a teacher, so she couldn't necessarily work at the school. It actually turned out that she always got a job on a local hire basis, but I always had to get the job with myself and my dependent wife. I was able to have a whole career doing that, and Keith had children all through. There's lots of children in international schools, so I wouldn't let that deter you. But Laura is right that schools, like any other organization, are looking at, they know they need to provide housing, so they need to provide more housing, more airfare benefits. If there's a waiting list in the school and every place is going to be filled, they need to give up some tuition revenue for the children. So it's a financial thing that schools think about. But don't let it rule you out. You can definitely do a career with children. Many of my friends have done a whole career with their families in national education.
And I could add to that there are some schools, in fact, where they see having a whole family come together as a positive, especially in maybe a more remote area where there's not a whole lot to do. People doing the hiring recognize that having a family there adds some stability and it adds to the community. You know, maybe a big school in an urban area is hiring a lot of young single teachers because it's a good match for them. But some of our managed schools in remote areas, I'm thinking of our school in Madagascar, having a partner and having some kids makes it a better experience for everybody, and the schools recognize that. So it's one of those questions that there's not one answer to.
And I'm going to back up Keith on that one. That is exactly right. And the end to this is, it's such a great experience for your kids. I cannot recommend it more. The learning, I'm sure Keith can speak to this, the learning that they go through and the global perspective they get is outstanding.
One thing also just that I would encourage you to do, if any member of your family has special health needs, make sure that you're very upfront about that with the school, because the ability of the country and location to support those needs varies greatly. So you want to make sure if there are any special situation in your family, make sure that you're upfront about that at the beginning. That's really important.
All right, thank you so very much. We have another fun question here, which is, can I bring my pets?
Well, we'll answer that one, being as someone who's brought their pets in all of their locations. I would say it varies location to location, but by and large, the answer is yes. In fact, I spent most of my career in the Arab world, and most Arab families don't have dogs, but we brought dogs to all of the locations that we were at, and you can definitely do that. It's expensive. Flying a dog in an airplane is like flying your child in an airplane. It's quite expensive to bring them, but certainly you can bring your pets in most locations. You want to talk to a particular school that you're about to lock with about how that's done with their country, because it really varies country to country. Some countries, like Great Britain, has a 6-month quarantine. So you want to make sure that you know how it's done in your particular country. But in general, you can definitely bring your pets. Oftentimes, people will also, if they don't have a pet, will buy a pet when they get to the location, and that can be done too.
All right, thank you so much. Another question we have is, are there any age limits?
That sounds like a Laura question to me.
Again, going back to what Bruce said, it varies location by location, but we are finding that countries are placing some age limits. Each country is different, and actually sometimes even within a country is different. Different regions in China, we believe, have different age limits, but we are finding this to be more common than it used to be. So schools are running into hiring issues. Some schools, there's one school or two schools out there that their age limit is 55, and it's because of the government has put in time, but predominantly the age limits are between 62 and 65. But I also don't want to discourage people that there are also many schools out there that don't have that issue. But yes, if you are more towards the been teaching for a while, you need to keep that in mind.
Thank you so very much, Laura. All right, so we only have enough time for one more question, but any unanswered questions will be answered in a follow-up email that we're going to send out, so do keep an eye out for that. So our last question is, how would you get started on looking for a position at an international school?
Well, that's really simple. First, you would join ISS.
Thank you, Bruce.
And then you talk to Laura Light.
And then you talk to the team that I'm working with. There's a great team in place here with ISS that's here to help anybody and everybody answer any questions that you have, fill out applications, find out about the opportunities out there, and get the benefits of coming on with ISS, because there truly are a ton of benefits to come on with us. You get access to salary and benefits, information about age requirements, you get access to things about housing, job notifications, but there is an online application process you've got to go through to come on with ISS, and that is there for a reason, because we're helping the schools sort of bring things together and be a screening for them. So schools look to ISS to help them find great people to come join them. There is some work that goes along with it, but once you've gotten through the work, the access that you have to jobs, schools out there is incredible. And again, I'm going back to being a former ISS candidate, and it's a great place to come. And the team, I'm going to sort of end it on that one. There are 8 people here at ISS, Christina being one of them, Tawan, and Megan, and Dana, that are all here to truly help all of you guys answer every one of these questions.
I would also say to you, one of the things that I'm often encouraging candidates to do when we're at the fairs is to broaden their horizons. It's very typical that people come and they think they want to be in Rome or London or Paris or Florence. And one of the things that I've learned in my career, and I think everybody would echo this, is that all of these places that you might not have ordinarily thought of are fantastic experiences, an incredible adventure, and really are life-changing. You can have life-changing experiences in just about anywhere that you find yourself in the world. So I would encourage you to open that up. And the other thing I think too is when you do go to a fair, if you happen to go to one of the fairs, one of the things that people always tell me that they love so much is just mingling with the other teachers. We have social events, and the teachers who are at the fair get to know each other, and there'll be a lot of experienced teachers there, and you can pick their brains and ask them all kinds of questions. It's really a pretty exciting event for people, I think.
Bruce, actually, just to jump in here really quick, this is Erin. For the folks on the phone who may not know what a career fair is, or a recruiting fair, could you maybe just introduce that topic?
You asking Bruce or you are?
Oh, either one, Laura or Bruce. I just think we haven't covered IRCs yet, so if we've had a few questions that might. That might be great.
Okay. Well, I'm going to start really quickly. I'm just seeing one quick question. When's the best time to apply? And I'm going to start with the aspect of right now is the best time to apply and get going. Someone had asked when's the best time to apply for admin positions or teaching positions. That hiring for international schools is completely different than what's happening here in this country, in the United States. The hiring for international schools happens. It starts rolling in October, I believe it's kind of early, really starts building up in November, December, January, and February. That is when the hiring is done. So you guys need to realize that. They're not going to be waiting until March, April, and May of next year, because they've got to get the visas together. They've got to get the shipments together. So those of you who are considering this, realize this is all done on a completely different time scale. You do want to start looking at coming on with ISS now. The jobs are starting to come in already, and going in that direction and really gearing up in December, January, and February. But as Aaron just mentioned, the events that we have are what we call IRCs, International Recruiting Conferences. We will be in Atlanta in December, we will be in Bangkok in January, and we will be in New York City in February. And that's when all the schools come together with the candidates, and we bring them all together, and we organize all different types of events. We have socials. We bring everybody together into a big room to sign up for interviews. We do 3 or 4 days of pretty intense get-together, and it goes from there. The contracts and the negotiations and the interviewing is between the candidates and the schools. We facilitate it all, but we're there to help you. So you want to look at coming to our conferences in Atlanta, Bangkok, or New York City. And as was mentioned earlier, you get thrown into an event with just great professionals, people who are already overseas that will help answer your questions, recruiters who want to hire the best will do everything they can to answer your question about their specific school. So you really want to look at coming to one of our conferences.
Another thing I would say too is we also have iFairs, which are online. It's kind of like an online recruitment fair where the schools create online booths, and you go in and you can get 5-minute interviews with a recruiter, and that what they usually do is they interview you very briefly, but then they set up the Skype appointment for another time, so you can get to you can talk to a lot of recruiters through one of our iFairs. Also, with your membership, you get access to the ISS database, and that will show you all of the different schools that are working with ISS for recruiting teachers, and provides information about their school, their salary and benefit packages. All of that is on our database.
All right, thank you so very much. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Thank you everyone for participating. We're going to have another webinar on September 27th, where we're going to talk about how you can take your teaching career overseas. Although if you're ready to get started now, keep an eye out for our follow-up email, which is going to have all of your unanswered questions addressed and going to have more information about international education and how to start an application with ISS. We look forward to seeing you next time, and have a wonderful day.
And I need to end this by saying thank you to Christina and Tuan and Aaron for pulling all of this together. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Nice.